on the daily review asks, why would stomach stapling help a person lose weight? Someone want to tell me what they said for the first question? What would be the purpose? Yeah, Avery. Right, so it prevents expansion, or we could even use the word stretching of your stomach. But that would be the idea. Your stomach normally is a big muscular thing that can stretch. And if we prevent it from expanding or stretching, then you cannot consume as much food. Number 2 is about acid reflux, talking about stomach acid entering the esophagus. And so we're just looking for the name of the structure responsible, and I will accept 2 different versions of the name. Does someone want to tell me what it's called? Either of the names? Oh, yes. So we could say the cardiac sphincter. We could also call it the esophageal sphincter, or we can call it a valve instead of a sphincter. So I would take the word cardiac or esophageal, sphincter or valve. We can interchange them. So it's just one mark here. Now for number 3, first question, what would be the cause of the pH in your stomach suddenly increasing? Does anyone want to tell me what they put for this? Why would the pH of your stomach all of a sudden go up? Now, this is an example where there's actually a whole bunch of things that you could say. Probably the most likely cause is reduced acid production. That's probably what's happening. Now, there could be other reasons too. Maybe you decided it would be a good idea to swallow a whole bunch of baking soda. I don't know why you would do that. It would be gross. But there are a lot of reasons that the pH in your stomach could drastically increase all of a sudden. The one most related to the biology that we're talking about is probably lack of acid. So why would there be reduced acid production? Maybe your gastric gland is either injured or it's not being stimulated. So we talked about a whole bunch of substances that are produced in your gastric glands. A couple of them are hormones or substances that stimulate the production of acid. So it could be a problem with your stomach, or it could be a problem with the signal getting sent to your stomach telling it to produce acid. So there are actually a ton of things that would be true here. I'm just trying to give you a few things to choose from. Now, did anyone put something for why the pH increased that they're not sure of? You want to check and see if it's right? So which substance would no longer work in these conditions? And here we're looking for a pretty specific thing. The idea is that pepsin can't function. For it to actually be called pepsin, acid had to mix with pepsinogen to activate it. So pepsin would revert back to pepsinogen, the inactive form. So without acid, I don't have pepsin, I have pepsinogen. And then finally, what would be the impact on digestion? Well, if I don't have pepsin, whatever pepsin was supposed to digest, because it's an enzyme, whatever it was supposed to digest isn't going to get digested anymore. Does anyone remember what pepsin digests? Yes, proteins. So we could simply say proteins are not going to be digested by an enzyme in your stomach if pepsin is not active. So there's 5 points on this daily review. So we'll talk about pancreas first. So your pancreas is the first of the accessory organs. When I was in, I don't think it was high school, I feel like it was university, I had a teacher who liked to make pictures out of everything. And he, when we were talking about accessory organs, drew an organ wearing jewelry, which I thought was fairly hilarious. And so if you would like, you can imagine something like that. Maybe a little pancreas with a necklace on, or a pair of earrings on your liver. In any case, your pancreas, what does it do? It actually has two very important but very different jobs. It regulates your blood sugar, and it produces digestive enzymes and a buffer. And we'll talk about each of those functions separately. Now, the distinction between these two functions is really whether or not it's doing something with your blood or it's doing something directly with your digestive tract. And so there are these two words here, endocrine and exocrine. And these are referring to where the substances it is producing are being secreted. So, an endocrine gland, which if you take Bio20E you will learn an immense amount about, is something that is secreting substances into your blood. Most of the time, that's where we're talking about hormones. So your pancreas produces hormones. Hormones are secreted into your blood. They travel through your bloodstream to the cells that they're targeting. An exocrine gland secretes into a duct, so a tube, not your bloodstream. For example, we already labeled the pancreatic duct. It runs down the middle of your pancreas. That is where your pancreas secretes enzymes that are going to go meet up with your food in your small intestine. So if we had to categorize, endocrine glands are producing hormones. Exocrine glands are producing a number of substances, but for the purpose of our discussion, we're going to focus on the enzyme part. So first we'll talk about how your pancreas acts as an endocrine gland. So we're going to talk about the hormones that it produces and how they work together to regulate blood sugar. Now before I do that, does anyone want to ask any questions so far? I put another picture of your pancreas just to remind you of its location. So it's often drawn as being underneath the stomach, but what is really happening is that you can't see all of it. A lot of your pancreas is behind your stomach. The other thing that I want to remind you of, because this will be really important today, here's your pancreatic duct. There's the duct that comes down from your gallbladder and your liver. And remember, those two ducts are going to meet up with each other right in the first part of your small intestine. So first we're going to talk about how your pancreas acts as an endocrine gland. So we already said endocrine glands produce hormones. And in your pancreas, the hormones that are produced in tiny little clusters of cells called the islets of Langerhans. So a fairly lengthy, sort of ridiculous name. Now the islet part is actually very descriptive of what it looks like. Most of you will know what an island is. An islet would be a small version of an island. If you look inside your pancreas, like at the picture I have down here, you'll see little clusters of cells. that look like a little island in the ocean that is your pancreas. Those are the islets of Langerhans. So they're little clusters of cells that look like a little island. And this is where the hormones that your pancreas is producing are coming from. Now there's two kinds of cells, beta and alpha. You might see them written with their Greek letter. So just so you know, the Greek letter beta just looks like a fancy letter B, but like someone was going to write in cursive and then change their mind. And the Greek letter alpha often looks like that. So you'll see it at church all the time. It's the fish. So if you happen to see those little symbols, that's what we're referring to. So the beta cells are the ones that are producing the one that you're probably familiar with, insulin. Insulin is produced when your blood sugar increases. So if your body detects, oh, I've just eaten something, my blood sugar has gone up, that's the signal for your beta cells to produce insulin. Now, what's the purpose of insulin? In both your muscles and in your liver particularly, a couple of things happen. One is permeability. Permeability means, are cells absorbing glucose? Is glucose allowed to enter cells? Permeability increases. That means glucose is going to move into your cells. That's an effect of insulin. It helps your cells take glucose from your blood and absorb it. The other thing that happens is conversion will take glucose and will turn it into glycogen. Glycogen, you might remember hearing about when we talked about muscles. Glycogen is a way that you can store carbohydrates in your muscles so that it's readily available when your muscles need it to perform cell respiration. Both of those things take glucose from your blood and put it into your cells so that your blood glucose level goes back to normal. Now, alpha cells, the other type of cells, produce something called glucagon. Glucagon does the opposite. So glucagon is produced when blood sugar falls below normal levels. So it's been a really long time since you've eaten, your blood sugar is dropping. This sends a signal to your body to put more glucose back in your blood. It has the opposite effect, so less permeability. Glucose is not going to go into your cells, it's going to go out of your cells. And the conversion will be reversed. Instead of taking glucose and making glycogen, I'll take glycogen and make glucose. Now this particular example, in my opinion, is a super fantastic way to describe homeostasis in your digestive system. The constant internal condition is blood sugar level, and your body responds if it gets too high or if it gets too low by secreting these hormones that bring it back to the level it's supposed to be at. Now, would anybody like to ask any questions about the two hormones or what their effects are? So on the quest for Chapter 6, which my plan is to do next Wednesday, when I ask you about homeostasis, please think about this example. It's very likely the context in which I'll ask about homeostasis. Now, the pancreas is not only an endocrine gland. The pancreas also acts, like I said, as an exocrine gland, and that's the thing we'll talk about next. Now, exocrine glands produce fluids released into tubes that travel to another body region. And I'm just going to reiterate, it's not going into your blood. And so for our context, because we're talking about the digestive system, we're going to talk about the enzymes and the pH-related substances that are produced there. Now, there are a few enzymes produced in your pancreas. Luckily for you, there's one enzyme for each type of macromolecule, so it'll be easy to keep track of them. For example, you have amylase being produced in your pancreas. We already saw this enzyme. It was made in your saliva. Amylase from your pancreas is going to convert poly or disaccharides to glucose. So it's continuing what started in your mouth. You also have trypsin. Now there's technically more than one kind of trypsin. There's trypsin and chymotrypsin. I'm just going to talk about one of them to keep our life simple. Trypsin takes peptides and converts them into amino acids. So trypsin helps to continue what was happening in your stomach with pepsin. So that's carbohydrates, proteins. We also have lipase, which we already saw in the stomach. So a small amount of lipase came from the stomach. Even more comes from the pancreas. This takes fats and breaks them down into their components, glycerol and fatty acids. Typically in the fats we see, there's 3 fatty acids and 1 glycerol. Now the fourth one I'm going to mention because it's there and because you're going to see it in your textbook, but it's not one that we've been focusing on. The fourth one is nuclease. It takes DNA, so molecules of DNA, and breaks it down into little nucleic acids. Now technically DNA is a macromolecule, but it's one that's focused on a lot in grade 12 bio, so I leave it out of the discussion for the most part. Now here's a key point. Food doesn't go in your pancreas. So these enzymes have to be released somewhere so they can meet up with your food, and very specifically, they are released into the duodenum, which is the first section of your small intestine. Now, aside from those enzymes, your pancreas is also producing something called a buffer, sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate acts as a base to help increase pH. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, if you recall, your stomach has an acid in it. So we are trying to neutralize the acidic chyme, which is the name of the substance that leaves your stomach. We're trying to neutralize this acidic chyme that's coming out of your stomach. And the reason we would want to do that is to turn off pepsin. We don't need pepsin anymore because we have trypsin. And we'd like to protect the lining of the small intestine. The small intestine does not have as much protection as the stomach does, and that's because it has to absorb things. And so we can't have that low pH in there eating away at the lining of the small intestine. So this is what your pancreas does. It produces hormones, that's endocrine. It produces enzymes, that's exocrine. I'll just pause here for a second. In the first column, we're going to list 5 different digestive fluids. So liquidy substances that are made by your body, and we're talking about where they're coming from. We're going to indicate their location of origin and of action, because sometimes that's not the same. So where are they made and where do they have their effect? Of course, we're going to name the enzymes that are in each spot. And when I say function of the enzyme, I mean which metabolic reaction is happening, what substance is being broken down, and what is it being broken down into. So saliva, origin, salivary gland, action, mouth. The enzyme is salivary amylase, and it takes starch and turns it into disaccharides. It could be slightly larger pieces of sugars, but disaccharides is a pretty common thing. Now your gastric juice has 2 enzymes that we discussed. They both come from the gastric gland, that's their origin, and they're both having their action in the stomach. One is pepsin. It takes proteins and turns them into peptides. The other one is gastric lipase, and it takes lipids and starts breaking them down to glycerol and fatty acids. Now your intestinal juice and your pancreatic juice both have 4. For your intestinal juice, the origin and the location of action for all of them is your small intestine. We could specifically say the first part of the small intestine, but really anywhere in your small intestine is where those substances come from. Now, if I wanted to be really specific, they're being produced in the crypts in between the villi, which I showed you last time. Saying small intestine would be specific enough if I asked you where they came from. Now, there are 4 enzymes there: maltase, sucrase, lactase, and peptidase. Maltase, sucrase, and lactase obviously affect maltose, sucrose, and lactose. And the other day we wrote down what they become, and we knew that from previous lessons as well. Peptidase takes peptides and starts breaking them down into amino acids. Your pancreatic juice, which we just saw today, everything is produced in your pancreas but has its action in the first part of your small intestine. And the 4 enzymes are amylase, trypsin, lipase, and nuclease. And then their functions are to break down starch, peptides, lipids, and DNA. And then lastly, we have bile, which is not technically an enzyme, but it's a fluid. Its origin is the liver. Its action, again, is in your small intestine. There is no enzyme, and its function is to emulsify fat.